All right, so renowned anti-apartheid struggle stalwart and former PAC president Dr. Motsoko Pheko is currently being laid to rest. In fact, the funeral service is still underway at the Rosebank Union Church in Sandton in Johannesburg. My colleague Mbalenhle Mthethwa is standing by for us live there now. Mbalenhle, good morning to you once again. You've been speaking to mourners about the great contribution of this man to South Africa. Who do you have next?
Well, the recurring theme from those who have come to the funeral and those we have heard speaking and those I have personally spoken to is that, South Africa is not yet liberated. One of the speakers, who's also a former leader, spoke of how 1994 did not represent an end to colonial rule, but a relaxation of the rules that governed the apartheid era, which then led to the inclusion of others. But due to the fact that land was not distributed to the majority of the country, they believe that, the negotiations ushering in the democratic dispensation did not do enough to liberate and to free the people, speaking on the lived experiences of many poor South Africans living in squalor, living in shacks, living in informal settlements, some with no basic services such as water and the likes. They believe that this is all just an indication of the fact that the country remains under oppression and that the freedom that was fought for during the apartheid era has not truly been realized in a democratic South Africa. Now, I'm joined by one of the family friends who spoke to us, and you are one of those people who left the country and, went into exile and lived in many parts of the world away from South Africa. But what stood out in what you said when you spoke today is that when you came back home to a free South Africa after 1994, the embrace was somewhat cold. Why was that?
I think people didn't know how to welcome us, didn't know who we were, didn't know what we offered, didn't know that we were longing to be home. We really wanted to come home, and this was our opportunity to. And so when it wasn't warm, we felt disturbed, but our parents had taught us that we were South African and that we were home and that this land belonged to us as well as the rest of the South Africans.
And you mentioned how your sister never came back because of that cold reception and South Africa never quite feeling like home. What would home feel like?
It's very difficult because we've never belonged anywhere. We never belonged, I wasn't born in this country. I was born in exile, and we moved from country to country, and in each country we didn't belong. I grew up mainly in England. I didn't belong there. And so not belonging is a real vacuum in your soul. You feel you want to be connected with everyone, but yet there's a distance. I don't know. I'm just a South African, and you can't take it away from me, whether I have this accent or not, or however I speak. This is my home. I belong, and I insist on that now.
Certainly, South Africans come in all shapes and sizes and speak in all manner of ways, really. And you are a South African through and through, really. But in also prison, you speak of your memory of Dr. Pheko, where you talk about how he was always selling books and you'd see him at book fairs. Talk to us about your fondest memory of him and maybe your fondest memory and what he taught you, what stood out in the things that he had taught you in the past.
Well, all our parents taught us about Africanism, who we were, who we are as Africans, and to be proud of that. And what I loved about him was that he'd been the leader of the PAC and had great, but yet he was humble and noble enough to go and take his writing and try and share it with people. So he would go to book fairs and sit at tables, or go to markets and sit at a market table and sell his books. And he was always amongst young people, so he was the oldest, even though you couldn't always tell because he looked very young. But he was always, he was that person who was with young people and wanted to inspire young people to be better than themselves by his teachings and by his writing.
Okay, and how will you remember him?
As I said, when I was growing up in England, my full name is Khethiwe, and my mother decided to drop the Khethiwe because in England they called me Zigedawe, and so we decided to call me Khethiwe, but Uncle always called me Khethiwe. Khethiwe is Ntombi. So that's what I remember about him. I remember him always being loving and caring, and when my mother passed away, he was there to comfort us. He was there when she had her stroke. He was always there for us at very important peak moments in our lives.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. There you have it, one of the family friends speaking to us on their memory of Dr. Pheko and how he will be remembered, just speaking about their experience as, people who had returned in South Africa and found a cold reception, and her sister deciding never to come back to South Africa and staying abroad and only visiting the country, but she continued to stay here. And she's also speaking of the fact that she received a very warm reception from the Dr. Pheko, and someone who also, she'll remember him as someone who tried to enforce her identity as Khethiwe and not Khethiwe Ngcobo. It is back to you in studio.
Thank you very much indeed once again, Mbalenhle Mthethwa, who's attending the funeral service of Dr. Motsoko Pheko that's taking place in Rosebank at the Rosebank Union Church in Sandton.